The summer of 1882 was the year the devil came to Perdition Creek, Arizona territory, though most folks didn't recognize him at first. He rode into town on a coal-black stallion during the worst drought in living memory, when the creek had dried to cracked mud and the buzzards circled so low you could count their tail feathers. The stranger called himself Lucian Blackwood, and he had the look of a professional gambler. Black frock coat despite the heat, silver-headed walking stick, and hands so pale they seemed to have never seen honest work. His eyes were the color of fresh spilled blood, and when he smiled, which he did often, his teeth gleamed like polished bone. Sheriff Tom Brennan watched from the jailhouse porch as Blackwood dismounted outside the Broken Wheel Saloon. In 20 years of keeping the peace in mining towns from California to Colorado, Tom had developed a sixth sense about trouble. And this stranger reeked of it like sulfur after a lightning strike. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Blackwood called out, tipping his black hat with theatrical courtesy. "Mighty fine town you have here. Shame about the drought, though. Heard tell your wells are running dry." Tom spat tobacco juice into the dust, his hand resting casual-like on his Colt .45. "We've seen worse. What brings you to Perdition Creek, mister?" "Blackwood. Lucian Blackwood. I'm in the entertainment business, you might say. Cards, dice, games of chance. Heard your local establishment might appreciate some professional competition." Through the saloon's batwing doors came the sound of raucous laughter and clinking glasses. The Broken Wheel was the only place in town still serving whiskey. Owner Jake Morrison had been hoarding barrels since spring, charging double for watered-down rotgut. But with the mines playing out and the cattle dying of thirst, even bad whiskey was better than facing the desert sober. "We got laws about gambling in this town," Tom said, though they both knew it was a lie. In a place like Perdition Creek, cards and dice were as common as fleas on a dog. Blackwood's smile widened, showing more teeth than seemed natural. "Oh, I always follow the local laws, Sheriff. To the letter. But tell me, what's the penalty for a man who wins too much?" Before Tom could answer, a commotion erupted from the saloon. The batwing doors burst open, and young Billy Cartwright stumbled out, his face white as alkali dust. Billy was barely 19, the son of the town's only remaining rancher, and he had the look of a man who'd seen his own grave. "Sheriff," Billy gasped, grabbing Tom's arm with shaking hands. "You gotta stop him. That gambler, he ain't natural. He's got cards that show things that ain't happened yet." Tom looked from Billy to Blackwood, who was examining his fingernails with the air of a man discussing the weather. "That's so, son. What kind of things?" "Death, Sheriff. Nothing but death. Every card he dealt showed how folks in town are gonna die. Mrs. Henderson choking on dust, old Pete falling down his mine shaft, even—" Billy's voice dropped to a whisper. "Even showed you, Sheriff. Showed you facing down a man in black at high noon, with the whole town watching." Blackwood chuckled, a sound like wind through a graveyard. "The boy has quite an imagination, Sheriff. Perhaps the heat's gotten to him. Desert sun can play tricks on a man's mind." But Tom had seen enough strange things in his years on the frontier to know when something was genuinely wrong. The air around Blackwood seemed to shimmer like heat waves, and the stranger's shadow fell the wrong way, pointing toward the sun instead of away from it. "Billy," Tom said quietly, "you go on home now. Tell your pa to keep the family inside tonight." "But Sheriff, go on, son." As Billy hurried away, casting fearful glances over his shoulder, Tom stepped down from the porch to face Blackwood directly. Up close, the gambler smelled of brimstone and something else, something like the scent that rises from a grave when the earth is first turned. "I don't know what your game is, mister," Tom said, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades wearing a badge, "but I want you out of my town. Now." Blackwood's red eyes glittered with amusement. "Oh, but Sheriff, I haven't finished my business here yet. You see, I've made a wager with the good people of Perdition Creek, a simple game of poker, with simple stakes." "What kind of stakes?" "Their souls, of course, against the one thing they need most, water. Enough water to fill every well, every creek, every reservoir for 100 miles. All they have to do is beat me at cards." Tom's hand moved to his gun, but Blackwood raised a pale finger in warning. Sheriff. No violence necessary. This is all perfectly legal, I assure you. Voluntary participation only." Though I should mention, if no one can beat me by midnight tonight, well, let's just say Perdition Creek will live up to its name in ways the founders never imagined. The gambler turned and walked into the saloon, his spurs ringing against the wooden boardwalk like funeral bells. Tom stood in the street for a long moment, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Then he followed Blackwood inside. The Broken Wheel Saloon had seen better days, but it was still the heart of Perdition Creek's social life. Cowhands, miners, and drifters crowded around tables lit by coal oil lamps, their faces grim with the knowledge that their town was dying by degrees. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and desperation. Blackwood had taken a table in the center of the room, and already a crowd was gathering. His deck of cards seemed to glow with their own inner light, each one showing images that shifted and changed when viewed from the corner of the eye. Jake Morrison, the saloon owner, stood behind the bar polishing glasses with nervous energy. "Gentlemen," Blackwood announced, his voice carrying easily over the murmur of conversation, "I propose a simple game. 5-card stud, no limit. The winner takes all." "What's the buy-in?" asked Jeremiah Stone, a grizzled prospector who'd been working claims in the territory for 30 years. Blackwood's smile was sharp as a razor. "For you gentlemen, your immortal souls, of course. But don't worry, I'm offering excellent odds. Beat me, and I'll guarantee water for this town. Lose," he shrugged eloquently. "That's loco talk," muttered Pete Kowalski, a Polish immigrant who ran the general store. "Ain't no man can guarantee water in the desert." "Ah, but I'm not just any man," Blackwood replied, and for just a moment his human mask slipped. Tom caught a glimpse of something ancient and terrible, horns that curved like a ram's, eyes that burned like coals, and a smile full of teeth that belonged in a wolf's mouth. The temperature in the saloon dropped 20 degrees, and several men crossed themselves or reached for Lucky Charms. But desperation is a powerful motivator, and these were men who'd already lost everything except their lives. "I'll play," Stone said, settling into the chair across from Blackwood. "Been dead inside since the mine played out anyway." The first hand was over in minutes. Stone drew 3 kings, a hand that should have won against most opponents. But Blackwood laid down a straight flush, the cards seeming to arrange themselves without his touch. As the last card hit the table, Stone aged 20 years in as many seconds, his hair turning white, his face collapsing into wrinkles. He stood up slowly, his eyes now empty as abandoned mine shafts. "Jeremiah?" Jake called out, but Stone walked past him without recognition, out into the desert night where he vanished like smoke. "Next?" Blackwood asked pleasantly, shuffling his impossible deck. One by one, the men of Perdition Creek sat down to play. Pete Kowalski lost his soul to a royal flush that materialized from thin air. Doc Holliday, not the famous one, but a broken-down medic who'd taken the name for luck, folded a full house when Blackwood's cards began bleeding real blood onto the table. With each victory, Blackwood grew stronger, more solid, while the town's men became hollow shells of themselves. Tom watched from the bar, nursing a whiskey and trying to think of a way out of this supernatural trap. "Sheriff," a soft voice said beside him. Tom turned to see Mary Catherine O'Brien, the Irish girl who worked as a seamstress and sometimes sang for the customers. She was barely 20, with red hair and green eyes that held more wisdom than her years should have allowed. "Mary Cat," Tom nodded. "You shouldn't be here. This ain't no place for a lady tonight." "And where else would I be?" she asked, her accent carrying the music of the old country. "This is my town too, Sheriff. My home, and I'll not be standing by while the devil himself steals the souls of good men." "You know what he is?" Mary Cat's smile was sad but determined. "My grandmother told me stories, Sheriff, about the dark ones who come when hope is nearly gone, offering bargains that seem too good to be true. She taught me the old ways, the protections, the prices that must be paid." "Can you stop him?" "Not stop, no. But perhaps I can give you a fighting chance." She reached into her reticule and pulled out a small cloth bag that smelled of herbs and something else, something like sanctified earth and holy water. "This is gopher dust, Sheriff, made according to the old recipes my grandmother learned from a conjure woman in New Orleans. Sprinkle it on your cards, and they'll show true. No illusions, no devil's tricks." Tom took the bag, feeling its weight like a promise. What's the price, Mary Cat? Your grandmother's stories always had a price. Her green eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. The price is already paid, Sheriff. Has been since the day I was born. Some of us are meant to stand between the darkness and the light. Tonight, it's my turn. By 11 o'clock, only 3 men remained with their souls intact. Tom, Jake Morrison, and a young cowboy named Danny, who'd been too scared to play. Blackwood sat at his table like a spider in the center of his web, his deck of cards now glowing with an unholy light that hurt to look at directly. "Well, Sheriff," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "it seems you're the last hope for Perdition Creek. Care to try your luck?" Tom stood up slowly, his spurs ringing against the wooden floor. Every eye in the saloon was on him, the hollow gazes of the soul-lost men, the desperate faces of the few women who'd refused to leave, and Mary Cat's green eyes that seemed to hold all the sorrow of the world. "I'll play," Tom said, settling into the chair across from Blackwood. "But I want to change the stakes." Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what did you have in mind?" "Not just my soul," Tom said, pulling out his sheriff's badge and laying it on the table. "Everything I am, everything I've ever been. 20 years of keeping the peace, of standing between good folks and the darkness. You win, you get all of it. But if I win, yes, you leave this town alone, forever, and you give back what you've taken." Blackwood's laugh was like breaking glass. "Ambitious, Sheriff. Very ambitious. But you're not just betting your soul now, you're betting your very existence. Lose, and you'll never have been. No one will remember Tom Brennan ever lived." "I understand the stakes." "Very well." Blackwood began to shuffle his cards, and reality seemed to bend around them. 5-card stud, winner takes all. Tom palmed the gopher dust Mary Cat had given him, sprinkling it on his cards as Blackwood dealt. Immediately, the supernatural glamour fell away, and Tom could see the game for what it really was. Not just poker, but a battle for the very soul of Perdition Creek. The first card came down, Ace of Spades for Tom, King of Hearts for Blackwood. The second, Queen of Spades for Tom, Ace of Diamonds for Blackwood. With each card, the tension in the saloon grew thicker, until the air itself seemed ready to crack. Tom's third card was the Jack of Spades. Blackwood drew the Ace of Clubs. The fourth round brought Tom the 10 of Spades, and Blackwood the Ace of Hearts. 1 card left, and Tom was drawing to a straight flush, while Blackwood already had 4 aces. "Interesting," Blackwood murmured, his red eyes studying Tom's face. "You're not sweating, Sheriff. Most men would be terrified by now." "I've been scared before," Tom replied calmly. "Fear's just another feeling, doesn't change what needs doing." Blackwood dealt the final cards. Tom looked at his hand and felt his heart skip a beat, the 9 of Spades completing a straight flush. But when he looked at Blackwood's cards, his blood ran cold. 4 aces and the Joker. A card that shouldn't exist in any normal deck, but which trumped everything in games played with the devil. "I believe that's my hand, Sheriff," Blackwood said, reaching for the pot. "Not so fast," Tom said, and his voice carried a new authority, not just the power of his badge, but something deeper, older. "You cheated." "Cheated?" Blackwood's voice was dangerously soft. "That's a serious accusation, Sheriff. The Joker ain't part of a standard deck. You added it after the deal." Tom stood up, his hand moving to his gun. "In this town, we got a traditional way of dealing with cheats." Blackwood rose as well, his human disguise finally falling away completely. He stood 7 feet tall now, with horns that scraped the saloon ceiling and eyes that burned like the fires of hell itself. "You dare challenge me, mortal? I am older than your civilization, more powerful than your comprehension." "Maybe so," Tom said, drawing his Colt 45 in one smooth motion. "But you're in my town now, and in my town, cheats face the music." The saloon erupted in chaos as the devil's true form was revealed. Men screamed and dove for cover, exact tables overturned, and the coal oil lamps flickered as if blown by an otherworldly wind. But Tom stood his ground, his gun trained on the creature that had been Lucien Blackwood. "High noon," the devil snarled, his voice like grinding stone. "Traditional showdown, Sheriff, your mortal weapons against my infernal power. Winner takes all. The town, the souls, everything." "Suits me fine," Tom replied. "But we do this proper. Main Street, 20 paces, fair and square." The devil's laughter shook the building. "Fair and square? You amuse me, Sheriff. Very well. But know this, I have never lost a gunfight. Never. There's a first time for everything. They walked out into the street, the entire population of Perdition Creek following at a safe distance. The moon hung full and bright overhead, casting everything in silver light that made the desert look like a vast graveyard. Tom took his position at one end of the main street, while the devil stood at the other, his form shifting between human and demonic with each breath. Mary Cat appeared at Tom's side, pressing something into his hand, a single bullet that gleamed like silver but felt warm as flesh. "My grandmother's last gift," she whispered. "Forged from a saint's metal and blessed by 7 priests. It's the only thing that can truly harm him." Tom loaded the bullet into his gun, feeling its weight like a promise of justice. "What happens to you, Mary Cat, when this is over?" Her smile was sad but peaceful. "I go where I was always meant to go, Sheriff. Don't mourn for me. Some prices are worth paying." The church bell began to toll midnight, each chime echoing across the desert like a funeral knell. On the 12th stroke, both men drew. The devil was fast, faster than any mortal man could be. His gun appeared in his hand like magic, spitting fire that burned blue-white in the moonlight. But Tom had spent 20 years practicing his draw, 20 years preparing for the moment when everything would depend on his speed and accuracy. The blessed bullet took the devil's center mass, and his scream shattered every window in Perdition Creek. He staggered backward, his form beginning to dissolve like smoke in a high wind. "Impossible," he gasped, his red eyes wide with shock. "No mortal weapon can." "Ain't just mortal," Tom said, walking forward with his gun still trained on the dying creature. "It's justice, pure and simple, and justice always finds a way." The devil's form continued to dissolve, but his eyes burned with malevolent fury. "You think you've won, Sheriff? This changes nothing. There will always be another drought, another desperate town, another." His words were cut off as Mary Cat stepped forward, her hands glowing with a soft green light. "By the old laws and the new," she said, her voice carrying power that made the very air tremble. "I bind you, creature of darkness. By water and earth, by fire and air, by all that is sacred and all that is true, I bind you to the deep places, never to walk among mortals again." The devil's scream dopplered away into nothingness as he was pulled down into the earth itself, leaving only a scorched patch of ground where he had stood. The supernatural cold that had gripped the town lifted, and somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled across the desert. Mary Cat collapsed, her red hair fanning out around her like spilled blood. Tom knelt beside her, cradling her head in his lap. "Did we win?" she whispered, her green eyes already growing dim. "We won," Tom assured her, though his voice broke on the words. "The town's safe. The souls are free." "Good," she breathed, and then she was gone, fading away like morning mist until only the memory of her remained. The rain began to fall as the sun rose over Perdition Creek, not the brief-step violent downpour of a desert storm, but a gentle, steady rain that soaked into the parched earth and filled the dry creek beds. The wells began to flow again, and the desert bloomed with flowers that hadn't been seen in living memory. The men who had lost their souls to the devil's game found themselves whole again, though they retained vague memories of their ordeal, like half-remembered nightmares. Jeremiah Stone returned from the desert with no memory of where he'd been, but with a new claim that would prove to be the richest strike in the territory's history. Tom Brennan served as sheriff of Perdition Creek for another 15 years, until age and arthritis forced him to hang up his badge. He never married, never spoke of what happened that night in 1882, but sometimes visitors to the town would find him standing in the cemetery, looking at a grave marked only with the name Mary Catherine O'Brien and the words, "She stood between." The Broken Wheel Saloon still stands, though Jake Morrison never allowed gambling there again. Travelers sometimes report strange things, cards that show glimpses of the future, shadows that fall the wrong way, and the faint scent of sulfur when the wind blows from the south. But the town prospers, the water flows clean and clear, and the people sleep peacefully in their beds. They say that on certain nights, when the moon is full and the desert wind carries whispers from the deep places, you can still see them. A tall man in a sheriff's badge and a red-haired woman in a green dress, walking the streets of Perdition Creek, keeping watch over the town they died to save. And in the old cemetery, where Mary Cat's grave stands beneath a flowering mesquite tree that blooms year-round despite the desert heat, there's a second headstone that appeared one morning without explanation. It bears no name, only an inscription in letters that seem to shift and change in the light. Here lies a gambler who bet against justice and lost. May his defeat serve as a warning to all who would prey upon the innocent. The people of Perdition Creek know better than to ask too many questions about things like that. In a town that once faced the devil himself and lived to tell the tale, some mysteries are better left unsolved. But they remember the story, passing it down from father to son, mother to daughter, keeping alive the memory of the night when good triumphed over evil, through courage, sacrifice, and the kind of justice that can only be found at the end of a smoking gun. For in the end, that's what the Wild West was really about. Not just the gunfights and the glory, but the ordinary people who stood up to extraordinary evil, who faced down the darkness with nothing but their courage and their conviction that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to change the world.